Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I'm joined by my colleague, Vanita Gupta, the Acting Assistant Attorney General of the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, Mayor Richard Berry, and Albuquerque Police Chief Gordon Eden. We are here to announce a new chapter for policing in Albuquerque. The Department of Justice, acting through the Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office and the City of Albuquerque, have concluded their negotiations following the Department's April 10th investigative findings regarding the Albuquerque Police Department. We have reached a court-enforceable settlement agreement that will resolve this matter without the need for costly and protracted civil litigation. The agreement we announced today will implement sustainable reforms to ensure high quality, effective, and constitutional police services for Albuquerque. It is also a roadmap for rebuilding the trust between the community and the police. Acting Assistant Attorney General Gupta will go into further detail into some of the innovations and unique features of this comprehensive agreement. But before she does, I want to address several critical points about the landmark agreement. First, I want to thank the Albuquerque community for being fully engaged and involved throughout this process. Your contributions during the investigation and following the release of our findings in April have been invaluable. I also want to thank you for your patience during our negotiations. Like any other settlement negotiation, it was important to create the right conditions for candid and direct discussions. As you will see, the agreement is comprehensive and covers all of the 8 areas discussed in our findings letters. And it reflects many of the ideas and suggestions that you, the community, so passionately shared with us. As many of you know, the Department of Justice team engaged in an unprecedented level of outreach to a broad cross-section of stakeholders in Albuquerque, including families of individuals killed as a result of officer-involved shootings, police officers and their families, advocates for civil rights, mental health, the homeless, and immigrants, the faith-based community, and the business community. Over the course of the Department of Justice's involvement, we have held multiple community meetings across the city and interviewed almost 700 individuals. We have also had more than 40 meetings attended in total by more than 500 police officers. In addition, we have had several meetings with more than 50 members of the Albuquerque Police Officers Association. We received and responded to hundreds of calls to our community telephone line and more than 1,000 emails sent to our community email box. We also met with numerous stakeholder groups to gain their perspective. We brought what we learned to the negotiation table. As you read through this 106-page agreement, you will find that this agreement is specifically tailored to the unique needs of the Albuquerque community and the Albuquerque Police Department. It reflects Albuquerque's ideas, Albuquerque's values, and Albuquerque's aspirations for our police department. For example, the agreement provides greater controls in the use and deployment of specialized units. In some cases, units intended to serve investigative functions had evolved into their own tactical units with special weapons, but without the proper supervision or oversight. The agreement requires ongoing monitoring, inspections, and supervision so that tactical units restore their mission as units dedicated to saving lives in high-risk situations, and that other units do not become unofficial SWAT units. One of the investigative units identified as problematic was the repeat offender program known as ROPE. The city has agreed to dismantle ROPE within 90 days of the agreement's effective date. Disbanding ROPE is a small piece of the greater effort to ensuring constitutional, effective policing. I would now like to directly address the rank-and-file officers of the Albuquerque Police Department. We want to thank you for your professionalism throughout this process and for recognizing that this process will help bring the support that you need to carry out your duties effectively and in accordance with the laws that you were sworn to uphold. Over this process, the Department of Justice team spent many hours in early morning briefings and late night shifts listening to officer concerns. And we are grateful for this willingness to express your views honestly and constructively. In these discussions, we learned that officers are not afraid of greater accountability for using force, but that they do have serious concerns with perceptions that the disciplinary system is inconsistent and arbitrary. Today's agreement requires that APD develop a fair and consistent disciplinary system and that supervisors are held accountable for the quality of their reviews. Now, Acting Assistant Attorney General Gupta will discuss in further detail how the agreement responds to other concerns raised by our officers. The Albuquerque community is currently considering our behavioral health care system. We know that mental health providers and other community stakeholders have formed a city-county task force to explore solutions to the challenges facing many individuals who have serious mental illnesses or who are chronically homeless. This dialogue and action is critical, and it will help support APD as it develops and strengthens its specialized responses to people in crisis. We also commend the inspiring efforts made by the faith community to join together and discuss peaceful solutions, and for the work that they do every day to meet the needs of the most vulnerable residents of our city. We now stand here to write the next chapter of the Albuquerque Police Department. This chapter is guided and given a sense of purpose by the commitments embodied in the settlement agreement. Now, the parties have signed a commitment letter that outlines our next steps. First, this settlement agreement will be presented by the mayor to the city council next week for the council's consultation and endorsement. Then, the commitment letter further confirms that the Department of Justice and the City of Albuquerque will sign the settlement agreement no later than November 10th of this year. The parties will then file the settlement agreement with the United States District Court. Following court approval of the agreement as a court order, the implementation of the agreement will be supervised by an independent monitor who in turn will be supervised by the court. The monitor will compile and produce compliance reports that will be publicly available and will engage with community stakeholders to keep the public informed about the agreement's implementation on an ongoing basis. In closing, I want to reiterate that this settlement agreement will advance meaningful and measurable reforms that ensure effective policing and build community trust for our police officers. Throughout this process, the Department of Justice team and I repeatedly have said that the vast majority of APD officers are honorable law enforcement professionals who risk their physical safety and well-being for the public on a daily basis. We say this because it is true. An officer's work is not easy, and their duties are often performed under difficult and dangerous circumstances. We are optimistic about APD's future because so many of its officers are committed to making our neighborhoods safer places to live, work, and play, and do so with integrity and in compliance with the Constitution and the law. This agreement will help our officers carry out their duties while protecting their safety and their rights. We are confident that you, our community, will support the Albuquerque Police Department through this reform process because you want the APD to succeed. I will now turn over the podium to Acting Assistant Attorney General Gupta, who will discuss some of the more significant features of the agreement.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Damon, for your leadership and for your incredible work in Albuquerque and across New Mexico. Throughout this investigation and in other matters, our attorneys and staff have worked side by side with the U.S. Attorney's Office to enforce our nation's civil rights laws, and we are very grateful for your partnership and steadfast support. I would also like to thank Mayor Berry for joining us to announce this historic agreement today and for your leadership throughout this process. I also want to thank Chief Eden, without whose leadership this would not have come to pass, critically important. Council President Sanchez, Albuquerque Police Officers Association President Lopez, family members, community leaders, invited guests, and the men and women of the Albuquerque Police Department who are joining us here today. Thank you all for coming. We are here today to announce a landmark settlement agreement between the Justice Department and the City of Albuquerque that resolves our findings on the use of excessive force and avoids a costly and protracted legal battle on the need for reform. This agreement comes from a mutual commitment by the City and the Department of Justice to ensure that the Albuquerque Police Department works with the community and polices in a manner that respects the rights of residents and that promotes mutual confidence between law enforcement and the community. Constitutional policing is key to building trust between the police department and the communities they serve. And trust is, of course, key to ensuring public and officer safety. Through this agreement, the city agrees to implement comprehensive and sustainable reforms in the way that it selects, recruits, guides, trains, supervises, investigates, and disciplines officers to ensure that officers are held accountable for their use of force, but also are fully supported in carrying out their duties in an effective, constitutional, and professional manner. In April, the Department of Justice found that the police department engages in a pattern or practice of excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. We specifically found 3 patterns of excessive force. First, Albuquerque officers too frequently were using deadly force against people who pose a minimal threat and in situations where the conduct of the officers heightens the danger and contributes to the need for use of force. Second, Albuquerque officers use less lethal force, including electronic controlled weapons, on people who are passively resisting, non-threatening, observably unable to comply with orders or pose only a minimal threat to the officers. And third, encounters between Albuquerque officers and individuals with mental illness and in crisis too frequently resulted in a use of force or a higher level of force than necessary. The department also found systemic deficiencies of the Albuquerque Police Department which contribute to these 3 patterns, including deficient policies, failed accountability systems, inadequate training, inadequate supervision, ineffective systems of investigation and adjudication, the absence of a culture of community policing, and a lack of sufficient civilian oversight. During our investigation and following our findings letter, the Department of Justice engaged in extensive outreach to the many communities that are represented in this room and that make up Albuquerque. We met with people who had experienced the violation of their rights. We met with concerned community, faith, and business leaders. And importantly, we met with hundreds of rank-and-file officers. These meetings provided us with the essential information on how the problems we identified were perceived by different communities, what the people of Albuquerque value and want in their police department, and ideas on the most effective strategies for reform. These many conversations and interviews guided and informed the agreement that we reached, and we are incredibly grateful to every single conversation and meeting that we had. Through these consultations and extensive, candid, and productive negotiations, we were able to achieve an agreement that meets the goals, I think common goals, of effective and constitutional policing, enhanced officer and public safety, greater trust between officers and the communities they serve, and ongoing community participation and community policing. Since April, we've been engaged in productive conversations with the city to develop a comprehensive and sustainable blueprint for reform. We are very grateful for the hard work of the chief and his staff, other city officials, and the city's council for their hard work. These negotiations were serious, they were candid, and they were also aimed at problem solving. They set a very strong foundation for us to continue to work together for reform. This is a truly landmark and historic agreement for the people of Albuquerque, and the agreement does the following things. It strengthens internal review into the use of force and requires continuous performance improvement. It requires training that emphasizes de-escalation before force is used. It provides officers with the training and tools they need to provide effective crisis intervention, and that allows police to work with community providers and stakeholders to address the underlying needs of individuals who are in crisis or with serious mental illness who are in need of supports and services. It provides guidelines for the effective use of on-body recording systems. It refocuses the mission of specialized units to ensure that tactical units are trained to save lives in high-risk situations and that investigative units do not stray from their intended purpose and training. And as Damon mentioned, the city has agreed to dismantle the Repeat Offender Project, a unit intended to serve investigative functions that had been allowed to become an unofficial tactical unit with special weapons. It removes arbitrary deadlines in the filing of civilian complaints against officers. It supports the city's efforts to ensure robust, independent, and effective civilian oversight. It builds on the commitments of surrounding law enforcement agencies that have agreed to investigate officer-involved shootings and other serious uses of force through a multi-agency task force that provides greater reliability and objectivity to sensitive investigations. The community is going to be able to measure the success of the agreement as it is implemented. For each of the critical provisions in the agreement, it requires both the collection of information on compliance as well as on outcomes. We want to make sure that we are measuring our ability to meet the goals that we have set out in this agreement. Much of the data will be available to the public so that critical civilian oversight functions can be performed. And transparency is really an essential component of the agreement and a critical element of reform and of rebuilding trust. This agreement comes at a time, as many of you know, where there is much national attention to the use of deadly force by police officers and whether police officers are meaningfully accountable to the communities that they serve. Albuquerque is not alone in struggling with these very difficult issues. At the Department of Justice, we are working with more than 24 cities and towns across the nation, and we know that from that experience that the provisions of this agreement will ensure that the city has an effective, accountable police department that controls crime, ensures respect for the Constitution, and earns the trust of the public it is charged with protecting. Today's agreement can and should be really a model, a bright spot for communities looking for a path forward to make their law enforcement more accountable and police practices more just. We will continue to actively engage all stakeholders in the implementation of the agreement to ensure that Albuquerque's policing services meet these goals. A key part of our task is to ensure that the hard work of the many women and men of the police department who serve honorably is not overshadowed by the unlawful behavior of others or by institutional deficiencies that make an already difficult job that much harder. The Department of Justice will remain actively engaged for as long as necessary, but not a day more, to ensure sustainable reform and to help restore the community's trust in its police department. We look forward to working with Albuquerque's elected officials, the chief and his command staff, rank and file officers, and the many, many people who have contributed to this investigation and settlement. Thank you.
Now I introduce Mayor Berry.
Thanks, Damon. Well, good afternoon. Today truly is an important and historic day for APD and for policing in the city of Albuquerque. With the release of this settlement agreement, I believe strongly that we are setting a new national standard for policing and police reforms. More importantly, I believe that our team from the city has worked in earnest with the Department of Justice to craft a reform package that will enhance safety both for our community and for our police officers, promote constitutional and effective policing in our great city, and deliver high-level, high-quality police services by augmenting the already great work done by the vast majority of the police officers at APD. This agreement reflects valuable input from numerous stakeholder groups, including families affected by officer-involved shootings, police officers and their loved ones, community and neighborhood leaders, advocacy groups, and our citizens. As the mayor of our city, I've been adamant from day one that this agreement needed to be crafted in a way that makes it achievable by APD and our community, trainable by the staff at APD, and measurable both by the monitor that we will select together, the department, and the public. Today I can look any member of our community in the eye and tell them that I believe we have in fact crafted an agreement that can meet those criteria, that in turn will lead to better community outcomes through training, accountability, and citizen input. I've asked my leadership team at APD, who spent hundreds of hours of their time crafting this agreement with the Department of Justice, if they feel this can be successfully implemented, and the answer I have received is a definitive yes. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy or inexpensive or without a hitch or stumbling block here and there, but I believe that we can all do this successfully if we work together. But we ask for help from our community and our officers and their families to accomplish our shared goals. It's clear that we all share a mutual interest in public safety, in reform, accountability, transparency, public trust, and accountability, without losing the sight of the fact that our police officers have a difficult and dangerous job as they face a growing number of individuals in our community who find themselves through a shortage of mental health services and substance abuse treatment programs in crisis. We lift up our officers in our thoughts and our prayers for the work that they do to protect our city and our loved ones every day. It's taken us a while to get to this point. Some would say decades. For me, this process started in 2010, just months after taking office. And while we did implement reforms during my first term, we all agree that we have much more work to do, both in the department and with our community. And I believe this agreement gives us the opportunity to do just that. Accordingly, we should not look at the settlement agreement as the finish line. In many ways, it is a new beginning. It's another major milestone in a long process of reform and trust building between a department of dedicated professionals and those they care for and serve. To build up the department and our community, we need a solid foundation to work from, and I believe this agreement contributes to that foundation. But I will caution our community, and I'll caution our department, that if we simply stop with the technical reforms for the department that are contained in this agreement, and we fail to forge the community relationships that the agreement calls for, we will not achieve all of our goals. We must build a robust, ongoing dialogue and a relationship between our citizens and our police department. And we need our citizens to step up and help us accomplish that goal, not just for today or tomorrow or for this year or for next year, but a generational dialogue and collaboration that starts now and continues after everybody that helped craft this agreement is gone. The fact is, we need the community's help to foster positive change. We will continue to provide a range of opportunities for everyone to participate, and as you read the agreement, you will see a number of opportunities. So I'm asking our community, please join us in our efforts. I know that our city and this department have the ability to do this the right way, and I'm committed as your mayor to the implementation of this settlement agreement, and I believe we have the right team in place, and we have the will as a community to move forward. Before I finish, I just would like to thank several folks. We had a wonderful team of people work on this at the City of Albuquerque. Chief Eden and Assistant Chief Huntsman, they were there every meeting, every day, working on crafting this agreement. Rob Perry, my Chief Administrative Officer, heavily involved in this agreement. David Turek, our City Attorney, and the entire City Attorney staff. Our Special Counsel, Scott Greenwood, and his assistant, or his associate, former Chief of Police, Tom Stryker. Thank you so much. And to Damon Martinez and your colleagues at the DOJ, thank you for working with us. Jonathan Smith, Luis Salcedo, Elizabeth Martinez, and others. I'd also like to thank our community members, the families affected by officer-involved shooting, our officers and their families, advocacy groups and our community leaders, and members of our community that simply took the time to come to the table and have discussions with us about reforms and about moving the department forward. So I look forward to working with all of those I mentioned, including our city councilors, and as we move this forward, who are willing to step up and help us to continue on our path for an even better department and an even safer community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, Police Chief Eden.
Thank you, and good afternoon. During our many hours of meetings with the Department of Justice, our mutual goal was getting this agreement right. When you look throughout the United States, you see so many agreements that are in conflict. We made a choice, and that choice was to meet, discuss, even argue, but to agree. Agree to these significant changes. I can tell you after reading documents, this is a forward-looking agreement that gives the reform process much momentum to achieve what our goals are, and that's effective constitutional policing while promoting officer safety. It was important for us to have well-defined terms in this agreement, so those requirements that are set forth in the agreement are achievable, measured, and sustained. The agreement is clearly written because it must endure. People will come and people will go, but this agreement will live on for the city of Albuquerque. I know that it will take strong leadership, and I want the citizens and the community of Albuquerque to know that we have a good leadership team in place who is committed to keeping us on track and moving forward. I have a strong team that I met with this morning, and they've assured me each and every one of them is dedicated to the implementation and sustainability of this agreement. Outcome measures in this agreement bring forth to this living document well-defined initiatives, well-defined training, well-defined reporting, and well-defined oversight for the department. We are all committed to promoting effective constitutional policing. I'm proud to be the chief of the Albuquerque Police Department and have standing with me the men and women of the Albuquerque Police Department who are dedicated to serving you, our community, with integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Eden. We will now take questions. Are there any questions?
I have a question for the mayor.
Yes.
Please.
All right, so you've already obviously agreed to make changes here. In the agreement, it says that the city does not concede to the accuracy of the allegations in the April 10 DOJ report. So I'm wondering what allegations don't you agree with, and why then are you making changes?
We took a concerted effort at the beginning of this process when the finding letter came out to turn towards reform and working with the Department of Justice. Our alternative would have been to spend a great deal of time contradicting individual points and spending a lot of time, as other cities have done, really focusing on every single word of the findings letter. We did not do that here. I made a choice not to do that. In order to do that, we had to reserve our rights to not agree with everything. But we simply said, the findings letter is out. We all agree that we want to put reforms, additional reforms into place. We want to move forward, and that's why we find ourselves here today. I believe faster by several months than any other city in the country having an agreement like this forged is because we didn't take that contradictory attitude up front. We sat down and said, let's get to work and get an agreement crafted.
Hey, Mayor, while you're up there, have you anticipated or been able to forecast a budget for what it will cost to implement this program?
We have a briefing paper that we'll put out today. I know the Department of Justice put out a kind of a summary of the 106-page document. We'll have one for you as well today. In there, we believe it will be somewhere in the $4 to $6 million range for the first year. We think $1 million of that in that area will be for monitoring. A lot of the costs associated with this will be when officers are being trained. And when you read the document, and we'll show you a chart today of how many hours our officers are going to be in additional training, we have to cover those officers with overtime while they're in training and then vice versa. So we think a lot of it will be the cost of overtime to keep officers on the street while others are being trained. We will have to develop curriculum. We'll have to provide training opportunities and pay folks to do that. That's the gist of it. We won't know until we really sit down in the next couple of weeks to a month and get every budget put together. Bill Slauson at the Albuquerque Police Department has been put into a specialized position where he will be doing this data collection, and we'll have more answers as we go. But we think was a long answer to a shorter question, which is $4 to $6 million is in the first year.
Nancy, did I see you had a question?
I do have a question, and maybe if one of you can answer this. In New Mexico, it's not uncommon for people to be arrested 30, 40, 50 times. There's a big problem with repeat offenders. How is the police department going to address the repeat offender issue if you don't have the right team?
Sure. The Albuquerque Police Department has other investigative resources that it will continue to utilize in the Special Investigations Division. Those detectives that have been assigned to ROPE will be assigned to the other divisions within the Special Investigations Division. We will continue with making sure that those people who are the most violent, that we have in place the right teams with the right training to address the repeat offenders.
Thank you, Jerry. How do you anticipate paying for all of this cost? You mentioned $4 to $6 million a year.
Right.
How do you anticipate paying?
Well, we have, the city of Albuquerque has a general fund budget, that's a little less than $600,000 a year. But if you look at our total operation, we're about $1 billion a year operation, 900 million plus. So we feel confident that we have the resources within the city to realign those resources, to put them towards the settlement agreement without affecting community services in any way that's substantial. So we've met with our budget staff at this point. We start the process. This is about the time of year where we start having our CAO hearings and we start crafting our budget. My budget will have to go to the city council on April 1st. We already have $1 million in place from last year in the budget, so thank you, councilors, for supporting that. And we'll be crafting this into the budget. But I don't believe there's going to be anything in the community where we have to shut anything down or have, we may have to do some adjustments, but I don't think it's going to be anything dire.
And I saw your hand up.
Yeah, this is for the chief and the mayor. We've seen that you increase administrative staff within the chief's office. Is there going to be a push to increase foot patrol or rank and file officers on the streets?
I think one of the most important parts of this agreement, and there's so many important parts, is that it mandates the city and the Albuquerque Police Department do a very comprehensive staffing study. And as we discussed this morning, this includes our 911 call takers, our dispatchers, our administrative support staff, as well as our officers. And that's an important part of the agreement because I believe that staffing is critical to the success of any organization. And that's one of the key components of the agreement is that staffing study be done and that we make sure that the officers have the resources as well as our administrative staff has the resources to successfully implement this agreement.
Please.
My question is for the mayor.
Yeah.
Mayor Berry, the majority of the new command structure at APD are individuals who come from the old guard and some of the specialized squads that have either been dismantled today or significantly reined in by the agreement. Those are folks who are now entrusted with implementing changes to a culture that they helped create. How do you explain that, and do you expect it to work?
I do expect this to work, and we've got Chief Eden, who has come into the department from the outside. We've got Chief Huntsman, who has a lot of internal knowledge of the department. And I don't want to speak out of turn or out of line, but the feedback that I've received from all parties involved here today is these two gentlemen have been absolutely instrumental in crafting this reform, working with the Department of Justice. They've come to the table with a can-do attitude. They are surrounding themselves with the leadership that they feel is important to carry this forward. This is a large police department, the largest in this state. There's no way anybody could come in and say, and do wholesale changes when you've got 900 plus people just in the Field Services Bureau. So the point is, we believe we have the people that are committed. Chief has put them in a place where they've been asked specifically, if you feel like you can contribute, we want you involved. If you can't, there's probably something better for you to do. So I do have the confidence.
Are there any more questions for, please?
Mr. Mayor, this is a question for you. The city has seen a number of protests, civil disobedience incidences, aggressive protests, and so forth since March, and some of these folks felt they weren't engaged enough. Do you feel that this agreement allows some of those people to be engaged, and can we expect to see less protests as this engagement moves forward?
Well, listen, we tell the protesters, you have the right to protest. This is the United States of America. We will help keep you safe while you do that. That is your right to do that. That's your choice to do that. But we really are inviting folks to come to the table, roll up their sleeves, and work with us. As you read this agreement, you're going to see a number of opportunities from community policing councils that we had our first kickoff meeting last night, actually, for the CPCs with some of our leadership there. We've got the community collaboratives, which Councilor Sanchez joined me for the kickoff meeting several weeks ago. And it requires us to provide resources to do that. So there's no shortage, in my opinion, of opportunities for people from the community to step forward and work with us. And once again, we're just inviting everybody to do that. We need your help.
Please, last question.
This is potentially for Ms. Gupta or for the mayor or Chief Eaton, depending on who wants to address it. But one of the big concerns referenced in that DOJ report had to do with lapel cameras and other transparency measures. What does this agreement do in terms of ensuring that those are not only used, but used properly and used effectively?
Do you want to take it?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So there was a policy in place prior to the Department of Justice's involvement, but what the agreement does do is it puts into place a use of standard procedures for the use and holds the officers accountable for non-use. And so what we've tried to do is really ensure that for practices and reforms that were already beginning to take place, that the agreement basically produces standard procedures, accountability measures for when standard procedures aren't met, and it attempts to really embody best practices based on everything that we have been learning about the use of these instruments. And so that is what is embodied in the agreement.
What happens if they identify the agreement, an officer doesn't?
I can answer. So let me add to that and then try to answer that question as well. Albuquerque Police Department was one of the first, and I think the only department of our size in the United States to bring on-body camera systems first. We were very much a leader in that up front. And with that came some challenges with technology, with training, with officer buy-in, some of the things that were addressed in the findings letter and things that the chief has talked about as well. Even though we were the first city in the country to do what we did, I believe this is the first agreement in the country that mandates on-body camera systems. So that's another reason it's a landmark agreement. It calls in there for additional policies, additional procedures, and that will be, if you read the agreement, you'll see that it's about that thick, right? It's 106 pages. But by the time Chief Eden and his staff are finished with all the training that goes with this and all the parts and pieces and the curriculum and everything else, it's going to be a lot of work to do. So their work really starts in earnest after this agreement is signed on November 10th. That being said, we'll take what we've learned. We will add to it. This agreement requires additional policies. Those will be crafted. We will agree upon those policies together. They will include disciplinary actions as well. So we're hoping to make it more understandable as technology advances, make it better for our officers to use, easier for them to use, and with that, the accountability measures will be there. So it's, I think the agreement really addresses that in a big way, and we think that's important both as an administration and as a department as well.
And also, just to supplement what was just said, as the mayor said, this is the first time that's been put in a settlement agreement like this. Now, specifically with the agreement, there's times that the on-body cameras have to be turned on. One is if the officer is making a stop that's based on probable cause or reasonable suspicion. Also, if there is a use of force involved. Also, if the officer is going to be encountering someone with a mental illness. So the agreement itself lays out times when the camera has to be on. It also lays out a procedure to make sure that it's operating properly, to make sure there's accountability that it's operating properly, and to make sure that what it does is it empowers the officers and the supervisors that if they see issues, they can help make change in creating that policy. Thank you very much.